A movie review I cannot wait to do, Godzilla Minus One. I now realize that I've been a low-key fan of the famous monster since I was a kid. I really think my relationship started back when my older brother got a Godzilla toy at a yard sale, and it was a hand-me-down that I got from him, and I would play with it all the time. I remember having bubble baths where I would play with the Godzilla, like, oh, look at him terrorizing the people. And then in the late 90s and 98, whenever the Matthew Broderick Godzilla version came out, my mom was working at Taco Bell and they had the best toys. And I remember they had this big collector's cup that had Godzilla wrapped around it. And I told my mom, please get your hands on one of those. And she did, and I loved it. So I think as kids, we are always just drawn towards dinosaurs, and Godzilla being the coolest one of them all, having a really historic past. There's been over 30 Godzilla films. And over the course of them, they've all kind of been similar. And you kind of know what to expect going into a Godzilla movie. It's a big, crazy monster. You have the atom bomb, you have his fiery breath, and he destroys cities, and people go running. And then in the end, they defeat the monster. That is basically the formula for every single Godzilla movie. And most recently in the 2010s, we've had a little bit more of a sophisticated look at the creature, trying to make it more cinematic, more Hollywood-like, but still kind of been along the same lines of you don't really go watch a Godzilla movie to have it change or influence your life. Big, fun action, big monster, that's what you get. But with this one, we have it going back in the hands of Japanese filmmakers, where I think the franchise truly shines with the people who created it. And this movie takes place in a bombed out Tokyo post World War II. It focuses on one character who went to war, was a kamikaze pilot, ended up not dying in war, and returning home after a crazy encounter with Godzilla where he is traumatized, he is dealing with PTSD, goes home and essentially gets scolded because he went to war as a kamikaze pilot but returned home with his life, which was not supposed to happen. So he has all of this weighing on his soul, combined with the fact that he's now terrorized and living with this fear of a Godzilla. He gets a job as a minesweeper in order to help out this woman he met who is taking care of this young child, and they start to form this little family, and that is where our character story really begins. Now, the thing I was not expecting about this movie was the human element, where it really shines. Because all the stuff I've been telling you, I haven't really told you about how good Godzilla is in this movie, because it was so well-rounded and so three-dimensional that it made me forget that I was watching a monster film. And this movie really attacked it on every single level of the filmmaking process. But at its core, this movie had heart, had story, and had characters that I was so invested in. And that is really what movies this year, and in really the past 5 years, have struggled with, is there needs to be something on the line. And this movie was only made for $15 million. But that's really all you need to accomplish, is create a mission for a character that has you rooting for him. And in this movie, you are rooting the entire time for him to be the hero in this story. So he is here, just out living this normal life, trying to do this job to earn some money that is a relatively dangerous job. And then Godzilla keeps popping up here and there. So now that we've told you about our character and the story we have going here, let's talk about Godzilla, who in this movie looks the best he has ever looked. And what I really loved about Godzilla Minus One is that maybe it was the fact that it was made for $15 million, but in the last few Godzilla movies I've watched, which I have enjoyed, Godzilla vs. Kong was a fun time. But in those movies, I don't really feel like they have the look and the essence of the character of Godzilla down in those movies. In this one, I really felt like Godzilla had personality, Godzilla had swagger, Godzilla had an identity, and it felt like there was weight behind the actions he was doing and acting in a very intelligent way that I haven't really seen in recent additions to the Godzilla franchise. But every single time he was on screen, it was important. There was the right amount of monster to non-monster ratio in this movie, because sometimes we just get a bunch of Godzilla where he's running around the entire time and you just get used to it. It becomes a norm and it doesn't feel like a spectacle when he's on the screen. Every time in this movie when Godzilla is on screen, you care about it, because I love the way his attacks were so articulate, almost like he'd plotted them out of coming up, he's going to terrorize, and then he's going back. He was like a really well dialed in quarterback almost, who knew what they wanted to do, knew how they wanted to score the touchdown, went out there and scored the touchdown, and then got off the field. That is exactly how Godzilla was in this movie, and I loved him for it. And I referenced the size earlier, that in this one, he was a little bit more agile and he grew throughout the entire movie, which really made it more impactful as the tension grew. Godzilla grew with it. He became more of a threat and he became even more of an unstoppable force. And the thing I was not expecting was to actually feel terror from this monster, where other times it just kind of feels like big, dumb fun whenever Godzilla is on screen. You're rooting for him to, tear down buildings and breathe fire. But I was actually genuinely scared throughout this movie, and I wasn't really expecting it to have any kind of a horror element to it. But this one was truly terrifying that it made me feel like, what would happen if Godzilla actually existed? The reign of terror he would go on, the amount of destruction he would create, not even just from like his feet, but even his like tail whipping around and crashing buildings, and the way people reacted to his actions in this movie felt so real and genuine to me. It is the best I've ever seen Godzilla look. So it all goes back to that human element, and it also just goes back to the filmmaking process in this movie where, like I was saying earlier, all the recent iterations of Godzilla had been very dark and eerie, and you don't really get a full picture of Godzilla the way I want it to be seen. Had this really classic monster-like vibe to it, but it was very bright and colorful, to the point that when Godzilla was on screen, he was very much the focal point, primarily in the scenes that take place in the water that just looked beautiful, seeing Godzilla rip through water. And that is truly where the character shined, because he is a creature of the ocean. And that was also the reason I felt scared, because there's one part where they're in this really small boat out in this open water and you have this terrorizing monster. You feel the most vulnerable in that situation, and the movie puts you right there in that action. My only regret of this movie was not seeing it in IMAX, because it truly, truly warranted the big screen, an even bigger screen that I went to go see it on, because not only were the visuals so big, the soundtrack and the score and the music and the special effects all added this other level that really puts you in that seat. I mean, whenever a monster has its own theme music, you know you're in for a good time. And whenever this track hit, I genuinely got goosebumps. And how just classic monster movie is that theme? I'm gonna play it again just because I love it so much. But then you have that combined with the terrorizing roar that is Godzilla. The roar we all know and love, but more sophisticated. And then it has some of the best chase scenes I've ever seen, not just in a Godzilla movie, but in any movie, really, with the soundtrack that just packs in the tension, building it. Listen to that soundtrack. It's so simple, a few charging notes. They just add a little bit more layers each time. It is a treat for the eyes, a treat for the ears. And to say that this was the best Godzilla movie ever would be easy. This is one of the best movies of the year. I'm looking right in the camera as I say this. This movie, Godzilla Minus One, is one of the best movies of the year. And there is nothing I can say that would take away from any level of enjoyment. The movie comes in at right under 2 hours, and it's the only movie this year that left me wanting more. And I would say, if you take apart all the little things, if I were just looking at this strictly from the viewpoint of a critic, I would probably give it a 4.5 out of 5. But I have not stopped thinking about this movie and how it's going to impact this genre. And then I go back to the $15 million budget, and it's made about $30 million at the global box office, which is amazing. And to think that you could make a movie like this that looks so big, looks so cinematic, has Hollywood written all over it, even though it was made in Japan, for only $15 million? That is astonishing to me. And then you look at the fact that the movie is in Japanese, and I watched it with English subtitles, and there was nothing lost in that translation. Like the director of Parasite said after winning the Oscar, once you overcome the 1-inch tall barrier of subtitles, you'll be introduced to so many more amazing films. You cannot say it any better than that. You should not let the fact that a movie is in another language keep you from enjoying it. And what I loved about this is that even though it was in another language and I was having to read and interpret, there was nothing lost on the characters themselves. I could easily tell and define each of those characters for you because of how good the acting was. But the movie had it all. It had a great opening, which I love in a monster movie. It had character development. It had great character arches, beautiful cinematography, a beautiful score. There is nothing bad I can say about this movie. I will say I could see why this movie is not for everybody. And even Kelsey, who went with me, this is not a movie she would ever go see on her own, but she ended up enjoying it. She doesn't like any type of horror movies, but it was that human element that sucked her in. And yes, maybe in the beginning there were some kind of brutal, not really rated R kill scenes from Godzilla. Even though it's not overly bloody in any way, I think again it goes back to that human element in the story and the characters that had her in as a non-Godzilla fan. So just by checking all the boxes without any other influence, this movie is easily a 4.5 out of 5. But due to the fact that I have not stopped thinking about it, I want to go watch it again. I definitely got to see it in IMAX because I didn't realize how big this movie was going to look on a $15 million budget. And the fact that it left me wanting more, that is the biggest factor in my rating. When I went to go see the two other movies I've given a 5 out of 5, Oppenheimer was one. At 3 hours, I loved it completely. I still stand by that 5 out of 5, but I was good after that. Same with Barbie. I loved that entire movie, but after it was over, I was good on it. I don't even need a sequel there. On Oppenheimer, obviously, you won't do that, but on Barbie, I don't need a sequel. For Godzilla Minus One, I could have been in that theater for another hour because it was so great, and I want to see a sequel to this story. So I don't normally hand these out. This is only my third of the year, maybe fifth or sixth in the entire time I've been doing this podcast. But for Godzilla Minus One, I give it 5 out of 5 Godzilla roars. Give it 5 out of 5 roars. You got to go see it. And I don't even say that often when I close a review because do what you want to do with your money. I just tell you how I feel about movies. But I honestly feel this is a movie everybody needs to see and experience. And even though it is a part of a legacy franchise, it still doesn't feel to me like that same category of everything being a remake and a reboot because it's such a fresh take. So do yourself a favor, check out Godzilla Minus One.